Hello and welcome to HBM's Crypto-Corner for Wednesday, May 3rd, 2023. We have a few things to talk about, so let's get started. On Flores Island, do ape men still exist? Islanders have long claimed ape-like humans, remarkably similar to the fossil species Homo floresiensis, survive in secluded forests of Indonesia. An anthropologist investigates why. By Gregory Forth, Dr. Gregory Forth, who wrote the excellent book Between Ape and Human. Leo community member Noko looks at a distant spot where he claims he and a cousin once saw the Flores Island ape man. Excerpted from Between Ape and Human, an anthropologist on the trail of a hidden hominoid by Gregory Forth, Pegasus Books, 2022. All rights reserved. During ethnographic field work on the Indonesian island of Flores between 1984 and 2003, I recorded local accounts of small-bodied, ape-like humans who reportedly lived on the island. When the discovery of the fossil hominin Homo floresiensis was announced in 2004, I was taken aback by the remarkable resemblance between the locally described ape men and paleoanthropological reconstructions of the late Pleistocene fossils. Exploring how this correspondence might be explained, I continued my investigations during 10 subsequent field trips between 2005 and 2018. The result is my 2022 book. The following excerpted essays from the book's first chapter. In the far reaches of the Indonesian archipelago lies Flores Island, a long, narrow land of high mountains, precipitous cliffs, and deep ravines. The island is home to some remarkable creatures, including the Flores giant rat, a tree-dwelling beast that can grow 70 centimeters nose to tail. Also found on Flores is the world's largest lizard, the Komodo dragon, a venomous carnivore that can attain a length of more than 3 meters. In ancient times, Flores Island once had the now extinct pygmy stegodon, elephant-like creatures no larger than a cow. But my concern is with an even more remarkable and even less expected animal, or perhaps two animals of very similar kinds. The meter-tall Homo floresiensis front lived at the same time as early Homo sapiens left and Homo neanderthalis right. One is an extremely small-bodied fossil human named Homo floresiensis, known from remains found in 2003 in Layang Bua in western Flores. Saying little more than a meter tall, the height of a 2 or 3-year-old child, the tiny species quickly became nicknamed the Hobbit after the J.R.R. Tolkien characters. Paleoanthropologists describe the Hobbit's skeletal features as archaic, comparable in some ways to Australopiths who lived 2 to 4 million years ago. Yet Homo floresiensis lived as recently as 50,000 years ago. The other human-like creature, which for convenience I call ape man, has yet to be scientifically identified. But one group that populates Flores Island, a people called Leo, claims these creatures are alive, if not well, in isolated sections of their mountainous territory. In their own language, the Leo named these ape men Leahoa. They describe them as small, in fact about the same size as Homo floresiensis, upright walking and hairy. Individual Leo offer credible accounts of Leahoa they have seen, including eyewitness accounts dating from the 1960s to the 2010s. Archaeological dates suggest Homo floresiensis had been living on the island since around 100,000 years ago. The species' ancestors may have arrived much earlier, but because dates are available only from a single site, when Homo floresiensis disappeared, or even if it disappeared, it's not known. There is reason to believe Flores Island ape men could be present-day descendants of Homo floresiensis. If so, it could mean that this species still shares Flores Island with modern humans. On the other hand, the human-like creatures Leo speak of could be purely imaginary. Which solution is best supported by the evidence is what interests me. Living some 300 to 400 kilometers east of the site where Homo floresiensis was discovered, Leo occupied one of the island's most mountainous regions. Rugged country by any standard. Not long ago, Leo people mainly practiced slash and burn, or swidden cultivation. In highland gardens carved out of mountain forests, they planted maize, rice, millet, and other cereals, and a variety of vegetables and tubers. In the 1930s and 1940s, part of the population began cultivating rice in permanent irrigated fields located in lower-lying places. About the same time, some Leo also abandoned highland villages to build settlements close nearer to paddy fields. Today, many Leo reside in villages near irrigated rice paddies that they farm. Even so, many farmers still plant highland gardens and reside at higher elevations, often a considerable distance from roads and other modern institutions. During the 20th century, Leo forests shrank due to human activities, yet the highest mountains remain covered in jungle. It is mainly in these regions that the Leos say people very occasionally encounter ape-men. The Flores Island ape-man is a figure I've reconstructed with the statements of numerous Leo people. I've never seen an ape-man, and partly for this reason some readers may want to dismiss any resemblance between these creatures and apparently long-extinct hominins as mere coincidence. One purpose of my research is to question such dismissal. I can immediately discount the possibility that the ape-man simply reflects local familiarity with the scientific discovery and reconstruction of Homo floresiensis. I was lucky. I first recorded physical descriptions of the Leo ape-man in July 2003. That was over 2 months before paleoanthropologists came across the remains of Homo floresiensis in September of 2003, and well over a year before the discovery was announced to the public. Even after that time, very few Flores Islanders learned much about the discovery. This doesn't mean ape-men exist as flesh and blood creatures, as opposed to imaginary beings existing only in people's minds. But actually demonstrating that ape-men are imaginary is no easy task. One might attempt to show that the thing's existence contradicts the laws of physics or principles of biological evolution. To be sure, some Leo reports do defy basic science. Fantastic claims assert ape-men can quote-unquote disappear or even quote-unquote fly. Yet many Leo accounts adhere to a thoroughly naturalistic depiction. If such realistically represented things do not exist, there remains the question of why people think they do. Indeed, why some give seemingly credible accounts of ape-man sightings. My studies on Flores Island have been broadly ethnographic, meaning that I investigate how people organize their social and spiritual lives, what they believe, and what they consider valid knowledge. Like all ethnographers, I have pursued this research by living with local people over long periods of time and conversing with them in languages in which they are fluent. My first stint of field work on Flores Island was in 1984. Since then, I've returned to Flores 19 times, typically spending 2 to 3 months in the field. As an anthropologist, I'm fully aware that verbal evidence of any kind can be fabricated, exaggerated, or simply mistaken. I'm mainly talking, of course, about statements by people who claim to have seen Flores Island ape-men. Yet one can evaluate putative sightings by considering the physical setting and people's descriptions. Do they sound like another animal? A monkey, say? Or a tree stump or rock? Or indeed something dreamt? One can assess the personality, character, and social status of witnesses, including what interests they may have in representing something in a particular way. Some Leo, like ritual specialist Goda, might have personal or professional reasons for claiming to see ape-man. For this reason, I place less reliance on accounts by people of a supernatural bent, most notably dealers in magically powerful ape-men body parts or substances in people of power, atabisa, or people of skill or knowledge, atabio. These people serve as spiritual healers, magicians, and sorcerers. They might have a personal, one might also say a professional, interest in claiming experience of things unfamiliar to others. The most valuable ape-men reports are those where two or more people claim to have seen the same thing simultaneously. I recorded several such accounts. But even in these instances, all witnesses could have been mistaken or misremembered what they saw. How could I be sure anything I heard reflects a natural creature corresponding to a scientifically unknown species? The short answer is I can't. Even so, several considerations reduce my uncertainty and may do the same for readers. I begin with deliberate deception. Researchers can find dishonest individuals in any field setting. There are ways of identifying people with reference to personal traits, social position, and interests who are inclined to deceive or exaggerate, such as the aforementioned sorcerers. But there are also reasons to believe that much of what people tell any anthropologist is accurate, at least in people's honest understanding. Most of what people said about Flores Island ape-men agreed with what others said, and where accounts diverged, it was usually possible to find a reason why. Also, deception and fabrication require effort. It's far easier for people to tell the truth as they see it, or simply say they don't know. Surely the best way to get rid of a troublesome anthropologist. Not only that, fabrication requires a motive. Sometimes people may tell mistruths to convey what they think an inquirer wants to hear, but it's unclear why Leo might have thought I was soliciting naturalistic depictions of ape men. It's more likely that some people were inclined to stress supernatural aspects, for people knew I was also interested in such things as local spirits, witches, and magical beliefs and practices. His truths might be told to pull someone's leg. A person in the US or Canada might tell someone they'd seen Bigfoot to fool them. But this wouldn't work among the Leo, for Leo regard their ape men as real, although rare animals, whose existence no one disputes. A North American parallel might be telling a person you'd seen, say, a wolverine, an animal even experienced outdoors people rarely encounter in the wild. Even if the claim was false, it would hardly constitute leg pulling. Leo were familiar with ape men long before the arrival of missionaries or other agents of colonialism. What's more, secondary school curricula have little or anything, if anything, to say about paleoanthropology or human evolution. So far as I can discover, textbooks, or for that matter, any of the few books that are locally available, do not include illustrations of non-Homo sapiens human ancestors. Educated Florinese Catholics, including Indonesian priests, are openly critical of Darwinian evolution, and ordinary Leo villagers are barely aware of it. Their indigenous cosmology contains nothing comparable to a view of present-day humans or animals having gradually evolved from physically different ancestors. There is no reason to suppose that their view of Flores Island ape men has in any way been shaped by the discovery of Homo floresiensis. Having no stake in and little knowledge of paleoanthropology, Leo would have no reason to doubt that a small bipedal animal combining features of humans and apes could exist in their territory. For Leo, Flores Island ape men are part of the local environment as much as any other rare creature, such as Komodo dragons. Unlike Bigfoot believers, no Leo ever goes looking for ape men. Leo have no motive, financial, social, or otherwise, for finding an ape man specimen. And because they are barely aware of outside scientific views, or any view that claims such creatures do not exist, they have no ideological interest in proving any quote unquote scientific establishment wrong. Jata stands where she reportedly saw an ape-man cross the stream on Flores Island. As this should suggest, Leo are also less biased than scientists who reject the possibility of non-Homo sapiens bipedal apes surviving to the present. Some academics and non-academics dismiss any knowledge of the natural world that has not received the seal of scientific approval. These skeptics should wonder why Leo think Flores Island ape men exist. They ought to give the Leo people a fair hearing. I have, in part because of the arrestingly naturalistic way people describe Lehoa. Accepted as plausible accounts of real creatures, what Leos say presents a challenge to biology and paleoanthropology. If not, another challenge arises to explain why people subscribe to the empirical existence of entities with little or no basis in observable reality. And I did read Dr. Forth's excellent book, and I really enjoyed it. It was quite good. I highly recommend getting his book to get more of a flavor of what he's talking about, and more of what you might call information, I suppose. The book is titled Between Ape and Human, an anthropologist on the trail of a hidden hominoid by Gregory Forth. Really excellent book. I highly recommend it. I realize this article is a little long, but I wanted to read it for you guys. Enigma documentary, DNA, giant eels, and an unseen film. A new documentary aired on Channel 5 some weeks ago looking into the enigma known as the Loch Ness Monster. This was one of the better programs on the subject as it focused on the search for the creature in the matter of the DNA samples taken from the loch in 2018 and the results released to the world in September 2019, which was covered at the time on this blog. A documentary was televised on the UK Discovery Channel devoted to the subject, which I reviewed here. The program opened with the well-known faces of Willie Cameron and Steve Feltham, and the story beginning all the way back in 565 AD with St. Columba and his water beast in what the original Latin text called the Lake of the River Ness. The tales of old flashed back to the modern day as drone technology was employed to take some excellent shots of the loch from on high. What would Columba have made of all this? Or would he yet have found the monster of the loch a more fabulous sight to behold? But every story has a beginning, which brought us to monster researcher Gary Campbell, who took us through the early days of the 1930s. The first photograph of the creature taken by Hugh Gray, then the one taken by a certain Kenneth Wilson, and a peek at what looked like an impressive collection of old newspaper clippings. This switched to various scenes, such as water bailiff Alex Campbell being interviewed in the 1950s, the Loch Ness investigation of the 1960s, right up to a young Steve Feltham arriving at the loch in 1992. Eyewitness Richard White told us about his pole-like neck sighting from 1996 below, and Gary Campbell's own sighting, which ensnared him around that time. Such seemed to be the summary of the last 90 years of the hunt. At this point, I noted there was near zero acknowledgement of evidence from the 1930s to 1990s. No classic photos apart from the two above. No Dinsdale film or any of the like. Was this down to brevity of time or making it all seem more relevant to the modern viewer? This moved us seamlessly on a chronological manner to the environmental DNA quest of Professor Neil Gemmell 4 years ago. While his team were seen on their boat collecting water samples, the talk turned to what the mysterious animal could be, because the hunt was now on for a sample of its DNA. Familiar theories abounded, such as deer, sturgeon, catfish, eels, and the venerable plesiosaur. So just how would one recognize the DNA of a plesiosaur? The professor suggested something between bird and crocodile DNA. That sounded reasonable, though the implication was that if you did have plesiosaur DNA, there was no way to verify that was the case beyond a reasonable doubt. This brought us to the contrast between this new brand of monster hunter and the old brand, which we were told is dying out. To be fair to Professor Gemmell, he was not presenting himself as any kind of monster hunter. That would be professional suicide. He was at Loch Ness to promote the science of environmental DNA, but if some unexpected strands turned up, they would then be firmly in the domain of science and some serious analysis could begin. Adrian Shine chipped in and said nothing that had been found in 50 years of searching. It was a failure which to him meant they were all either useless or looking, or there was no monster. But there was those 3 sonar contacts he saw during Operation Deep Scan in 1987. He again admitted that he did not know what they were, although that did not mean to him that they were monsters. I do not agree that the traditional monster hunter is dying out. Their numbers are certainly down on the heady days of the 1960s and 1970s, but dying suggests a process that ends in death rather than a process which may have bottomed out. Who knows? We look to a newer generation to continue that particular form of the hunt. But the documentary then moved back to the theories. C. Feldham talked about the front-runner theory which ticked the most boxes for him, the Wells catfish. He suggested a dozen or so juveniles may have been released into the loch decades before the whole Nessie media circus exploded in the 1930s. It is entirely reasonable that those fish could have grown to large proportions in time from 1933 onwards, but I am not convinced that the Loch Ness environment was suitable for breeding, and so they are all long gone. As others have said, this does not explain long neck sightings or land sightings. I suspect one solution there is to discount these other genres as explicable by known phenomena around the loch, in which case why not just explain the remainder in the same manner? Gary Campbell was more attracted to the giant eel theory and recounted a tale from 15 years ago when an eyewitness saw something evidently large and eel-like swim past and under them and was longer than their 15-foot boat. It was appropriate at this point that Gordon Holmes' 2007 video of something long and slender was displayed, though the man himself did not make an appearance. All these large but known creatures were discussed by Adrian Shine and Neil Gemmell as they assembled some seriously long ropes to gather those important water samples from the lowest possible depths of about 200 meters down. As the program approached the point where the DNA results would be revealed, various points of view were expressed on topics such as what DNA may or may not be found, what if it wasn't recognized, and the urgency of getting the samples into a protected environment as they can degrade quickly. It was then that we were treated to the Bobby Pollock film of August 2000. This is one of those films which tantalizes, but getting a close look at it in terms of the whole film or a decent number of frames is proven elusive. We got about 15 seconds of it in the documentary, of a total of 3.5 minutes filmed by him. This is a film which would greatly benefit from some video stabilization due to the shakiness of the filming, and perhaps after that some further image enhancement to clarify the object of interest. The creature, or whatever it may have been, was hundreds of yards away from Mr. Pollock. But there is something there to dig deeper into. For those unfamiliar with this film, the Glasgow Herald of 12th of March 2002 gives the account. The 3.5-minute video was filmed by Mr. Pollock, 45, from Crookston, as he walked in Invermoston Bay with his wife Catherine, 41, and 3-year-old son Robert. Mr. Pollock claims he saw the creature rise around 5 feet out of the loch, and that it was jet black in color. The video has won him £500, from bookmaker William Hill for the best recent Nessie sighting. The official Loch Ness Monster Fan Club administers the annual award on behalf of the bookmaker. Mr. Pollock said, "We stopped at a place called the Stone Seat overlooking Invermoriston. It's Invermoriston Bay for our lunch, and I saw an object floating on top of the water. It started moving off towards Fort Augustus at quite a pace. You could say that it was a seal or a deer in the water, but I've seen things like that in the water. It definitely wasn't one of them. I've never seen anything like this in 12 years. It's very strange." Mark Stewart, curator of marine mammals at the Scottish Sea Life Sanctuary in Oban, Argyll, studied the video 30 times. He said, "Sometimes it looked like a seal, sometimes it didn't look like anything like a seal. It was moving quickly. It was pretty quick. I felt too quick for a seal." Mr. Stewart said he showed the video to experts and staff of the sanctuary, but no one knew what it was. Though Mr. Pollock captured the images in August 2000, he held off for more than a year before bringing them to the attention of Gary Campbell, president of Inverness-based Loch Ness Monster Fan Club. Mr. Campbell said Mr. Pollock did not release the video because he feared ridicule. He added, "But when I saw it, I realized that what he had was probably one of the best pieces of footage ever. We have spent a long time analyzing this video. After careful analysis, we concluded that whatever was in the water was definitely animate. I include a still taken from the documentary. It's the dot in the center. It doesn't look much. It doesn't look like much from here, but it looked better as a film sequence, yet still in need of enhancement. Single frames from video do not translate as well as a still image taken with a camera, and then there is the problem with recording images of objects in Loch Ness from the shore, as one could already be hundreds of meters away from the object of interest. Even the claimed 5 feet of neck or whatever it was would be a challenge at such distances." After some wrap-up comments on the monster legend, including the assertion that people who want to believe in monsters will see monsters and how King Kong may have influenced people, it was on to the DNA results. Professor Gemmell has spent a year analyzing the sequences with the help of various labs, and it was time for the news conference at the Loch Ness Center to tell the world what the 250 samples had revealed. First off, nearly 3,000 species have been found, and most of these would be of the microscopic variety. No reptile DNA was detected or anything that was catfish, sturgeon, or seal. To that could be added the absence of cormorants, mergansers, ducks, and otters. I could quite understand why seal DNA was not found, as they are not indigenous to the loch and are rare visitors. The other reason for absence of DNA was the low density of it in the water. I can see that as the land-based creatures are not always in or on the water. However, the emphasis of the results was on the eels of Loch Ness. Large amounts of eel DNA were found in almost every sample taken from the loch, which led the professor to speculate about the possibility of giant eels. The DNA samples did not prove the eels were gigantic, neither did it disprove their presence in the loch. All this assumed giant eel DNA does not differ significantly from normal eel DNA. The other result that people took note of was that about 20% of the DNA remained unidentified due to errors in sequencing, samples being too short or temporal. I was not sure what temporal meant. Various people then gave their opinions on these results. Steve Feltham said lots of eel DNA was a given. So what was there to say? Willie Cameron suggested that the small amount of water sampled compared to the loch size, plus the admitted absence of DNA for otters and so on, left the mystery open. Gary Campbell focused on the amount of DNA samples, which gave inconclusive results as another possible avenue. As the program closed, Professor Gemmell hailed the survey as a success, as it provided a platform to popularize science, and I did not doubt this was achieved. Despite the absence of what people had desired to be found, disproving a negative was not what he had set out to achieve. Environmental DNA surveys can only talk about what was found, not about what was not found. The absence of otter DNA did not imply that otters had disappeared from Loch Ness prior to 2018. Or then again, maybe it did, but people were not accepting that implication. So the documentary ended, and watching it cover those events of 2019 again gave me an opportunity to revise what my own thoughts were on the eDNA survey now compared to back then. The first point was that there were no catfish or sturgeon in Loch Ness for the same reason there were no seals in the loch. That is, there were zero catfish, sturgeon, and seals in the loch and in the months prior to when sampling began. That was the position I took. But on reflection, one should not discount the other reason, and that was due to an inadequate supply of their DNA floating in the water. If there was a solitary seal in the loch in the weeks up to the sampling survey, would it have been detected? My guess is it was more unlikely than likely, unless the boat luckily sampled in the area it was most active over about 26 square miles. That is all a theoretical possibility, though I regard it as the second choice explanation. Which brought me to the second point regarding DNA samples from animals which are indigenous but for which samples are not found. I refer to the other otters, cormorants, and ducks, etc. In that case, one can be pretty sure that their DNA was in the water, but it never meaningfully got into the sample bottles. That suggests to me that DNA shed by an animal does not travel very far from its point of origin. There are exceptions, such as if the animal in question was located at the mouth of a river, then the flow into the loch may spread its genetic code further. But otherwise, it seemed to me that if an animal or small group were fairly localized in their activity over a certain time period, their DNA would be harder to find. Does that mean the Loch Ness monsters exhibit this behavior? Well, as said above, one can only really talk about what was found rather than what was not found. As an aside, I read that no salmon DNA was detected from the fish farms near Dores. I found that a bit hard to believe, and it was not stated in the documentary, but I would like to see a confirmation of that from another source. If that were true, then DNA really does not travel far and maybe tends to go down rather than across. Probably because it is held within feces. The third point was on that 20% of DNA that was unclassifiable. Was this hidden in that pool of data? Once again, hidden from our eyes? That was an argument that I never found convincing. If 20% of some hypothetical Nessie DNA was too degraded to identify, then I could accept that statistic, but for 100% of an entire class of DNA to disappear down this black hole looked improbable. One animal's DNA was surely no more prone to degradation than any other animal? Well, I still take that view, but I thought it over, and the only reason for a whole class of DNA being corrupted would be due to the animal in question moving in an environment that accelerated DNA loss. Nothing came to my mind that would allow this. What about the abyssal deep near the bottom of the loch? Was there a difference in acidity, water pressure, oxygen levels, silt density, temperature, or light levels that could affect DNA? I was not persuaded either way, and am no expert on DNA stability to take it further, but I will keep an open mind on that question. Which brings us to those eels. Okay, so eel DNA was found in Loch Ness. No surprise there, you might say, as people have said there are millions of them in the loch. But Professor Gimmel expressed surprise that so much of their DNA was found almost everywhere. Now thinking again about it, he has a point. The eel in question is the European eel, or Anguilla anguilla, and according to Wikipedia, the European eel is a critically endangered species. Since the 1970s, the numbers of eels reaching Europe is thought to have declined by around 90%, possibly even 98%. Contributing factors include overfishing, Parasites such as Anguilla crassus, barriers to migration such as hydroelectric dams, and natural changes in the North Atlantic Oscillation, Gulf Stream, and North Atlantic Drift. This would seem to be the reason for his surprise. Was Professor Gemmel expecting samples consistent with a critically endangered species? If the number of migratory eels at the Loch Ness has been dropping for decades, is there an unaccounted for surplus of non-migratory eel biomass in the Loch Ness? Maybe, but the question is difficult to answer. I made an inquiry as to whether the amount of eel DNA collected gave an indication of the total eel biomass, but I was told it could not, which was a disappointment. Moreover, I am not aware of any attempts to estimate that value from any survey in past decades. All I have found is statements that there are or were millions of eels in Loch Ness. Based on the 90 to 98% drop, does that mean there are now hundreds or only tens of thousands there now? There is nothing quantitative apart from past small samplings with nets and the latest eDNA results. There may indeed be a surprising amount of eel in Loch Ness, and the excess could be found in the proverbial 2-ton creature or 2,000 equivalent normal eels. I read that the eel population in Europe is now recovering after various conservation measures, but still well short of historical norms. That is good news for large animals eating the various fish in Loch Ness. If they are gigantic eels, there is still no way of telling if that DNA collected a few years back belongs to them or the kind pulled up by a rod. So, when we look at Loch Ness Monster, are we looking at a giant eel? Or a species of giant eels? It would have to be a species, it can't be just one. It's really an excellent question, considering that it was largely eel DNA that was found, a very large amount. Makes you wonder. Suspicious footprints that could be Bigfoot found in snow, dwarfing that of a human. Some people seem convinced that the mystery of Bigfoot may have finally been solved after monster footprints were found deep in some snow that dwarf any human foot. Very interesting looking track. Here's a human track beside it. Doesn't say where this is, though. Monster footprints that some believe belong to a Bigfoot have been found in some snow. Images of the tracks were shared in the Bigfoot Believers Facebook group by Juan Perez. He described them as very suspicious and explained that it was his wife who spotted them. Handily, she made her own footprint next to it to compare the size. Juan wrote, "So my wife sent me a picture of some very suspicious footprints going through 3 yards, and she put her foot imprint next to the big print she found, and she's a size 10 in women's shoes, and this is huge." Juan described the footprints as very suspicious. The wife's foot doesn't even appear to be half the length of the mystery footprint. At the toe end, the mystery footprint is roughly 4 times wider. Although Juan didn't reveal exactly where the images were taken, Bigfoot Believers is an American-based group. Some people in the comments section seem convinced Juan's wife has stumbled upon some legitimate Bigfoot tracks. And obviously, why didn't they use a tape measure to measure the stride? One said, "Looks real to me." Another said, "It looks to me like a possible Bigfoot print. Another smaller animal walked over it later." A third said, "You know the answer to what it is. I'm a believer. There simply is so much we don't know. We may dominate this earth, but we don't own it. Amazing, and she is brave to be out there," said the fourth. However, not everybody was convinced. One person commented, "I don't think this is a print. Not saying it's been faked, but it really looks like a mess of animal prints in it." Another said, "It looks like a great print, hon, but it just seems your wife's footprint has sunk further into the snow than this print. Surely, if the creature is that big and has made this print, there would be a deeper indentation, but nice print. And this appears to be, it's interesting. This appears to be deeper than this. Now, why is that? Is this a hoax footprint or is it a misidentification? My bet is misidentification, to be quite honest. This could be a amalgamation of different footprints. I'm skeptical of footprints in snow anyway, because they can melt and refreeze and make weird shapes. So nice try, but no cigar. This real Appalachian mimic might be responsible for cryptid noises. The good news is you can befriend one of your very own. A leisurely bike ride turned into an unexpected adventure for a couple in Appalachia. They heard an unusual sound that grabbed their curiosity and gave a little shake. The woman couldn't quite place the sound, but it resembled a mix of a cat's meow and something robotic. Intrigued by the unfamiliar noise, she disobeyed the quote-unquote rules of the Appalachian Mountains and ventured into the woods to find the source. As she looked up into the trees, she was astonished to see the creature responsible for the mysterious noise staring back at her.
Kids in the Appalachian Mountains, hear me out. Okay, so story time. So Bill and I go bike riding pretty much every weekend in the springtime, and it was 80 degrees on Friday, so Bill and I got on our bikes and went down to the river, and we're hanging out. We just hang out. It's like, come on. While we were sitting next to the river, I heard something that I had never heard before. Now, if you're anywhere near the Appalachian Mountains, you have heard of the cryptid legends of so many different types of myths and monsters. The Mothman of West Virginia. I mean, they even have a statue of him in an annual festival. Of course, this guy is huge on cryptid talk. They don't even like to say his name, which I'm gonna whisper it. You guys ready? The Wendigo. They call him Windy Boys because people don't even like to say this thing's name. They're so afraid of it. And these are the Appalachian Mountains. So I'm right, boop, there. So part of this trail. So back to the story. We're sitting by the river and I heard something that I can only describe as a cat that didn't sound like a cat. I'm gonna try and do the noise, but please don't laugh too hard. It was something like, like it sounded like that. And it kind of sounded like robotic, as if it was trying to sound like a cat, but it didn't sound like a cat. And me being me, I jump up to go look and see what possible creature could be making this noise, because it was not a cat. Realized that it was coming from above us in the trees. And I was like, so excited, like, oh, this is my moment. I'm gonna find the Wendigo. It's gonna be me. I'm gonna get it on camera. Doing the thing that the Appalachian people tell you never to do is to look into the trees when you hear a weird noise. And I saw it. Up at the tippy top of the tree, I saw the animal that was making the noise. It wasn't a Wendigo. It was a crow. Crows are amazing mimickers, and they can mimic everything from other animal sounds to mechanical noises to human speech. And this crow was sitting at the top of the bough making a cat's noise, and I realized it was sitting right next to a little bird's nest. And they do this in an attempt to scare the parent bird away so that they can fly over to the nest and eat their eggs or their young. Crows are pretty ruthless. So my theory now is that all of these strange noises that people are hearing in the Appalachians are probably crows. Because as you all know, if you follow my channel, I'm a skeptic at heart, and there is no evidence to substantiate any of these cryptid claims. There's simply a lack of evidence. But trust me, as much as I want to believe in them, because I read every creepypasta, every Reddit no sleep, I love horror movies, and I would love for these creatures to be real, but I remain a skeptic.
Interesting. She thought for sure this was her chance to capture a cryptid on camera, thinking it would be a devil monkey or perhaps even a Wendigo. But no, what she found was a very common crow. These birds actually have a remarkable ability for mimicry and can make a wide variety of vocal sounds, sometimes even copying human speech. Reflecting on her experience, the woman has now become convinced that many of the strange noises people report hearing in the Appalachian Mountains may actually be the work of crows. With their remarkable vocal abilities, a range of sounds that can easily mimic other animals, and their propensity for collecting shiny objects, crows are often mistaken for something far more mysterious. Everybody hopes for the opportunity to see a cryptid in the wild, but this woman's experience serves as a reminder that the natural world is full of fascinating creatures that can be just as amazing as any legend. And who knows, maybe one day she'll stumble upon a creature that truly defies explanation. So, obviously not a cryptid in this case. And it's amazing to me how many different animals and birds can make weird noises and be blamed. And, well, cryptids are blamed for the sounds that they make. But it's not always a strange cryptid or a strange creature. So keep that in mind. Here's an interesting article I found by the late Dr. John Benernagel. The Sasquatch, an unwelcome and premature zoological discovery. Abstract: over 3,000 North American reports of a large, hair-covered, bipedal animal resembling an upright gorilla have been recorded and reviewed. More importantly, over 100 different tracks attributed to such an animal have been cast and archived. At the same time, wildlife biologists and other zoologists continue to ignore this evidence and to reject papers on the subject submitted for presentation to professional conferences. This attitude of dismissal results in the ridicule and discredit heaped on the subject in the popular media, coupled with the perceived unlikelihood of a large, non-human primate occurring in North America. The discovery of the Sasquatch may be premature in at least three ways. The animal resembles a bipedal ape, an anomaly in a mammal group that is perceived to be exclusively quadrupedal. Its tracks resemble large versions of human tracks, and it occurs on the North American continent where no other non-human primates are known to occur. The possibility of such an animal existing anywhere, but especially in North America, apparently appears so preposterous as to be an affront to scientists. Nevertheless, the hypothesis that the Sasquatch is an upright North American great ape remains the best explanation of the available evidence. Introduction. In 1958, a Northern California road construction crew reported the overnight appearance of a number of large footprints resembling those of a giant human. Subsequent newspaper coverage included a photograph of a highway foreman, that was Jerry Crew, holding a plaster cast of one of the 16-inch long footprints. Bigfoot was first used in print as a nickname for the creature whose tracks, although shaped like those of a human, were superhuman in size. For most North Americans, this marked the beginning of an ongoing controversy regarding the possible existence of a large human-like primate on this continent. Historical accounts, whose Sasquatch reports are merely myths, although not widely known, accounts of a giant human-shaped creature and of the tracks associated with it already existed in historical and anthropological literature. The historical accounts are of interest because they provide early examples of what are now regarded as Sasquatch reports. Equally interesting are the expressions of doubt which continue to be associated with such reports today. For example, as early as 1790, a Hudson's Bay Company trader commented on the belief of the North Saskatchewan River Indians in a giant human-like creature known to them as Wendigo. He remarked that they frequently persuade themselves that they see his tracks in the moss or snow. Umfreville, 1790. Both the Aboriginal belief in such creatures and the non-native disbelief are recorded in another account, that of a Methodist missionary to the Cree and Saulteaux Indians of Lake Winnipeg in the province of Manitoba. In this account, Young, 1893, wrote that among the many errors and superstitions into which they have fallen is the belief in the existence of gigantic creatures, half satanic and half human, whom they represent as being of great size. We found the Salto Indians especially living in a dread of these imaginary monsters. Expressions of ambivalence and dismissal regarding the Sasquatch as a real animal. Folklorist Carol Henderson interprets such monsters as metaphorical in nature. While apparently agreeing with these authors and thinking that they are not real, Henderson, 1976, nevertheless expresses some ambivalence. The beasts represent the mystery, strength, and untamed nature of large parts of the Canadian West, especially British Columbia. As this area moves fully into the 20th century, becomes thoroughly civilized and populated, the monsters may vanish. Then again, they may persist because they may really be there. After referring to accounts of common wildlife species regarded by Indians, she points out that other animals unknown to Europeans have typically, though perhaps unjustifiably, been classified as mythical or supernatural beings. It cannot be proven that the Indians themselves saw these creatures as mythical, but anthropologists and other scholars have generally considered them such. Audrey Halpin, former director of the Museum of Anthropology at the University of British Columbia, is one example. Halpin notes that hallucinatory experiences are experiences accepted as real by the experiencer, but not shared with others. She concludes that as long as Sasquatch is a personal rather than a collectively sanctioned experience, it will remain hallucinatory as officially defined by Western culture. Halpin, 1980, 211. Referring to the ape-like appearance of the Sasquatch, she writes that since there is no category in Western culture for creatures who mediate the animal-human realms, scientists had no category for the Sasquatch to exist in. Halpin, 1980, 226. This idea that Sasquatch are creatures who mediate the animal-human realms is a commonly held view among cultural anthropologists. For example, Robert A. Brightman, professor of anthropology at the University of Wisconsin, is quoted Rath, 1985, as having studied reports of Bigfoot and is believing that these stories can be explained from a sociological standpoint. Images like Bigfoot, images between humans and animals, seem to be common to people of all states of society. If it's not universal, it's close to universal. Society may feel a need to separate itself from animals so that we know we're different. Creatures that merge the characteristics of man and animal let us define ourselves more clearly. The closer the creature comes, the more specific we can make rules for being human. It is not surprising that cultural anthropologists espouse the view of the Sasquatch as supernatural. Such a view is consistent with their background and experience with myths and legends, in which some mythical creatures, such as the Thunderbird, do indeed appear to be supernatural. John Green, 1968, explains that when the term Sasquatch was introduced to the public in the 1920s through the writing of J.W. Burns, Burns quoted Indian stories which included supernatural elements, thus stigmatizing the Sasquatch as an Indian legend. Green believes that this was unfortunate because scientists in particular are inclined to dismiss the subjects of Indian legends as purely imaginary. Suttles, 1972. While this might explain why scientists have uncritically accepted the supernatural as an explanation for some of the sighting reports, it does not excuse zoologists and other scientists from bringing their knowledge and experience to bear on the well-documented track evidence. Professor Ian McTaggart Cowan, former Dean of Science at the University of British Columbia, has also been described as the father of wildlife management in British Columbia. Regarding the Sasquatch, he once told a journalist, people believe in these things because they like to believe in them. And it keeps on going because people like it. And why not? It's a charming story. My attitude is just show me, that's all. Watts, 1994. Professor Cowan and other zoologists who dismiss the Sasquatch as a zoological anomaly and therefore unworthy of study would find some support for their position in the comments of Thomas Kuhn, author of a classic work in the philosophy of science. Kuhn, who understood the problems associated with an apparent anomaly, wrote that it is for the normal, not the extraordinary, practice of science that professionals are trained. The scientist who pauses to examine every anomaly he knows will seldom get significant work done. Nevertheless, it is surprising that only a few scientists have risen to the challenge embodied in his further comment. We have to ask what it is that makes an anomaly seem worth considered scrutiny. Kuhn, 1996. Here's a few eyewitness drawings of Sasquatch. 1A, Oregon, 1971. 1B, British Columbia, 1965. 1C, Ontario, 1993. 1D, Washington State, 1991. That's actually Darren Richardson's sketch. 1E, Ohio, 1E, Ohio, 1980, and 1F, New Mexico, 2002. Credits for eyewitness drawings: 1A, Mysterious Creatures, 1988, Alexandria, Virginia. Time Life Books, Volume 114. 1B, Unnamed Prospector, courtesy of John Green. 1C, Desmond Warren, courtesy of Tim Urington. 1D, Darren Richardson, courtesy of Ray Crow. 1E, Charles Fulton, courtesy of Jody Cook. 1F, Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, BFRO, courtesy of Reed Nelson. Nature of the evidence for the existence of the Sasquatch. There are 5 components to the substantial body of evidence that makes the Sasquatch anomaly worthy of scrutiny. The database of eyewitness reports of large, hair-covered, upright, human-shaped large mammals, or its tracks, now numbering over 3,000 reports, and distributed over a period of over 150 years. The remarkable consistency of the physical descriptions of this creature, including anatomical details as shown in Figure 1. The sincerity, credibility, and reliability of eyewitnesses, some of whom are law officers and experienced outdoor workers such as fisheries officers, combined with the reluctance of these witnesses to be recognized or credited for their report. The similarities of these descriptions to an upright bipedal version of a well-known, possibly related animal, the gorilla, Sasquatch, are consistently described as huge, hair-covered, human-shaped animals with a short, thick neck. They differ from upright bears primarily in having a flat face and shoulders which are typically prominent or squarish, rather than tapered or sloping. The expanding collection of over 100 different track casts cataloged and archived at Idaho State University by anatomy professor Jeffrey Meldrum and available for examination in Figure 2. Figure 2. Field guide drawings of a 2A upright black bear and 2B Sasquatch. Drawings by Wendy Dick. Figures 3 and 4 in Bindernagle, 1998. The Great Ape Hypothesis. Anthropologist Halpin is correct when she notes that scientists have no category for the Sasquatch to exist in, but only if we restrict ourselves to North American mammal field guides. When limited to current field guides, a bear standing upright is indeed the closest image to the Sasquatch, since the opportunity to compare the appearance of an upright bear with that of a Sasquatch, as illustrated in Figure 2, is not generally available. As a result, most wildlife biologists continue to insist on misidentified bears as the most likely explanation for Sasquatch reports, despite its unbear-like appearance. The continued absence of the Sasquatch from current mammal field guides constitutes an authoritative statement against the existence of the species in North America. Had zoologists acknowledged the poor match between bears and Sasquatch descriptions and been willing to consult a global mammal field guide or mammal list, they likely would have been struck by the resemblance of eyewitness descriptions and drawings of the Sasquatch to those of an upright gorilla. This similarity has been alluded to by many eyewitnesses who describe the creature they observed as an ape-man man beast, giant monkey, or simply an ape. The connection was made as long ago as 1978 by journalist Sean Green, both of the text and title of a book titled Sasquatch the Apes Among Us. Green, 1978. Anthropologist Grover Krantz developed the concept further in his book entitled Big Footprints, Krantz, 1992. Indeed, the long arms, the body covering of dark hair, and the short, thick neck attributed to the Sasquatch are all physical features that are characteristic of the great apes of Africa and Asia. The gorilla, chimpanzee, bonobo, and orangutan. Of these consistently reported physical features, the long arms are especially noteworthy. One mammal field guide lists arms longer than legs as a field mark of the chimpanzee, and similarly exceptionally long forelimbs as a field mark of the gorilla, Clutton Brock, 2002. Indeed, arms which are longer than legs are considered a unique physical characteristic of great apes, whereas arms shorter than the legs are considered a human character, Dixon, 1981. Long arms, approximately 115% of leg length, which are consistently attributed to the Sasquatch, suggest an ape rather than human affinity. In addition to these gross morphological similarities between the Sasquatch and the upright gorilla, a number of anatomical details attributed to the Sasquatch in eyewitness descriptions and drawings also occur of the great apes. One of these is a pointedness to the head, which at least two observers have included in eyewitness drawings, figure 1D and F. In gorillas and orangutans, this pointedness is the outward manifestation of the sagittal crest, a ridge of bone located medially on the top of the skull in an anterior-posterior direction. Zoologist George Schaller, who undertook the first field studies of the mountain gorilla, described the sagittal crest of gorillas as variable in size. He noted that in two silverback males, the sagittal crests were so large that they resembled hairy miters. Schaller also noted that low sagittal crests may occur in large females. Schaller, 1963. Another anatomical feature observed and recorded by eyewitnesses is deep sunk eyes. In April 1973, a 9-foot tall creature walking on two legs stepped out in front of Alan Scrumenda's car near Easterville in west central Manitoba. Looking at us was this thing that had the appearance of man, although it was 3 times the size of the average man. It turned to face us, staring into the headlights. It was covered with hair and there was a flat-profiled face. The most striking feature was the creature's eyes. They were really sunk in. McAnulty, 1974. More recently, 1993, Desmond Warren observed an 8-foot-tall creature in Ontario's Ottawa Valley, which walked away on 2 legs. He described it as being at least 3 feet wide, having a chest like a bodybuilder and not too much of a neck. It had deep sunk eyes, and where we would have eyebrows, it had a ridge that stuck out a fair piece. Urington, 1998. The eyewitness's drawing made by Desmond Warren is shown in Figure 1C. Reference to almost any book illustrating the great apes will confirm that deep sunk eyes are an obvious feature of the face of great apes, especially gorillas. Significantly, deep sunk eyes are also a physical feature emphasized in a number of accounts of the hairy giants in Aboriginal myths and legends. Anthropologist Claude Levi-Strauss noted that the myths of British Columbia's Fraser River Aboriginal groups included a character called the Sasquatch or Sanok, who was characterized as a black giantess with bushy eyebrows and eyes deeply sunk into the orbits. Levi-Strauss, 1982. In a collection of stories entitled Quackulal Legends, Quack 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 Quack. Sorry, I did my best. Chief James Wallace of northern Vancouver Island, British Columbia, relates a number of tales about a creature referred to as the Giant of the Woods or Woods Giant. In several of these, deeply sunk eyes predominate in the description of the face of the giant. At the end of one story, the Woods Giant made an offer to a father and his sons. You may use this on your totem pole's face mask. You can make the mask just like our face. The story concludes with the father and his sons accepting the giant's offer. No one else had a mask like theirs. It was a frightening mask with the eyes sunk deep in the head. Wallace, 1981. The Wallace story typifies the link between giant human-shaped creatures in Aboriginal myths and legends and in modern reports. It may relate to the kernel of truth on which most myths and legends are based. The apparently human-like attributes of the Sasquatch, reasons for prematurity and unwelcomeness. Although most anatomical features of the Sasquatch are consistent with those of the great apes, the bipedal gait of the Sasquatch is often raised as inconsistent with the knuckle-walking quadrupedal gait of the great apes. That the great apes commonly walk bipedally in order to carry food items in their hands or arms is apparently not widely known. This problem was addressed by geneticist Gunther Stent in an article entitled Prematurity, Uniqueness, and Scientific Discovery, Stent, 1972. Stent explained that the discovery is premature if its implications cannot be connected by a series of simple logical steps, canonical or generally accepted knowledge. Based on this definition, the discovery of the Sasquatch suffers from prematurity in at least three aspects. First, it appears to be a bipedal ape in a group whose members are thought to be exclusively quadrupedal. Second, it has the appearance of a great ape on the North American continent where no other apes are known to exist. Marjorie Halpin's argument that there is no category for the Sasquatch is another way of stating this. A third problem is the shape of the foot, as documented in the numerous photographs and casts. It is shaped more like a giant human foot than like those of any other mammal, thus suggesting a human rather than a great ape origin for the creature. Figure 3. It is unfortunate that most North American biologists are unaware of the similarity between the human foot and the foot of a large ape, such as the mountain gorilla. The primary difference is the divergent or abducted big toe of the gorilla foot compared with the adducted big toe in the human foot and Sasquatch foot, in which it lies alongside the other toes, figure 3A and B. It is noteworthy that the Sasquatch foot sometimes exhibits a degree of divergence or abduction of the big toe, rendering it less human-like and more ape-like in form, figure 3C. It is this apparent blend of human and great ape physical characteristics which may have contributed to the unwelcomeness of the Sasquatch as a subject for unbiased consideration and study. The fear that the Sasquatch may constitute a missing link between humans and related ancestors has implications for human evolution, not all of which are welcome. The possibility that such an animal may still exist today, unacknowledged and virtually in our midst, may be taken as a professional affront by scientists. Paleoanthropologists Alan Walker and Pat Shipman addressed the problem of unwelcomeness in scientific discoveries when writing about paleoanthropological discoveries in Africa. They wrote that surprises about the identity or attributes of our ancestors may be deeply unsettling and unwelcome. Even professionals, if they are not vigilant, are liable to fall into the trap of refusing to evaluate the evidence objectively. Walker and Shipman, 1996. Figure 3. Cast of Sasquatch tracks. 3A, Vancouver Island, BC, 1988, 15 inches long, 6 inches wide. 3B, Washington State, 1982, 15.5 inches long, 6 inches wide. 3C, Washington State, cast of juvenile Sasquatch track, 7 inches long, 5 inches wide. Note, slightly abducted big toe. Rejection of opportunities for scientists to examine Sasquatch evidence. Although the shape of Sasquatch tracks raises unwelcome evolutionary questions of origin and relatedness, it is nevertheless the casts of tracks which provided the best answer to Thomas Kuhn's admonishment to evaluate what makes an anomaly seem worth concerted scrutiny. It is the track casts which constitute the much-needed tangible evidence. As noted above, over 100 of these casts have been cataloged, archived, and made available for scrutiny by zoologists. They should be of interest, especially to wildlife biologists who routinely depend on tracks as a basis for mammal surveys. Wildlife biologists, more than any other professionals, excepting perhaps some experienced hunters and trappers, have the expertise and experience to competently scrutinize and evaluate the validity of track casts attributed to the Sasquatch. If the notable lack of interest in examining this evidence is puzzling, the continued rejection of conference papers illustrating such evidence and intended to stimulate discussion is even more problematic. In the absence of professional evaluation of tracks, there has arisen an almost universal dismissal of purported Sasquatch tracks as the work of hoaxers. The uncritical treatment in the popular media, often including an element of ridicule, has further estranged scientists from addressing the track cast evidence. In the absence of professional attention, what little investigation is being done is largely undertaken by dedicated but untrained amateurs. An inevitable result of the Sasquatch being ignored by scientists and explained instead by non-scientists is the raising of wildly conjectural explanations and serious proposals. Such explanations occasionally include associations with UFOs, visitors from another dimension, and shapeshifters. The tabloid and mainstream media have exploited these more bizarre explanations to further increase an atmosphere of levity and ridicule around the subject. As a result, scientists have understandably distanced themselves even further. This may explain the reasoning given by the chairperson of a national conference on an International Society of Wildlife Biologists for rejecting a paper on the Sasquatch. Until there is hard evidence of their existence, the issue of the Sasquatch remains tabloid material and not part of the scientific community. A zoology professor recently rejected a proposed seminar presentation reviewing existing Sasquatch evidence, reasoning that if this creature exists, it would be the zoological discovery of the century, a possibility apparently too unthinkable to be presented to his colleagues and students for serious consideration. Results of rejection by scientists. As mentioned above, the relegation of Sasquatch research by scientists to well-meaning but untrained amateurs is fraught with problems. As pointed out by Michael Cremo, evidence found by non-scientists tends to be not valued and therefore not well looked after and gets lost or thrown out. On the other hand, evidence which conforms to contemporary thinking is carefully cataloged and preserved. Cremo, Personal Communication. Although the amateur investigators are not at fault, since they are merely filling a void left vacant by scientists, the result is inadequate documentation and treatment of evidence. It must be emphasized that this is not a criticism of such investigators, but is an inevitable outcome of the unwillingness of scientists to include the evidence for consideration in a professional context or forum. Conclusions. In closing, it may be instructive to briefly examine current attitudes toward the Sasquatch in the context of science according to the recent comments of Ian Tattersall, curator of anthropology at the American Museum of Natural History. Tattersall, writing under the headings Nature of Science and Falsifiability, reminds us that scientists generally start from established notions that seem to be becoming a little wobbly. These they test against new data and observation. Tattersall, 2002, 10-11. In the case of the Sasquatch, none of the established notions entail a real animal. They include instead the supernatural, a metaphor, an invented being, misidentified bears, and human hoaxers. These notions have become increasingly wobbly as Sasquatch reports are documented and archived, and as detailed reports from reliable eyewitnesses are filed and reviewed. More extreme notions put forward, such as visitor from another planet, Visitor from a UFO and shapeshifter are not considered to be established, in that they are more recent proposals and only taken seriously by a few people. Tattersall noted that new ideas are proposed, and once these new ideas and observations are out there in the public arena, they can be tested. Tattersall, 2002, 8 to 9. New ideas regarding the similarity of Sasquatch anatomy, behavior, and ecology, and the reports and trackcasts on which they are based, have been proposed in books and media interviews for over 30 years. But rather than being tested or critiqued by relevant scientists, they have so far been either ignored or dismissed without scrutiny. Tattersall may be presenting an idealized portrait of science when he states that what matters is that science as a whole is a self-correcting mechanism in which both new and old notions are constantly under scrutiny. The edifice of science consists simply of a body of observations and ideas that have so far proven resistant to attack, and that are thus accepted as working hypotheses about nature. Tattersall, 2002, 9. In the case of the Sasquatch, the body of ideas that are accepted as working hypothesis remains the notions listed earlier: supernatural, metaphor, invented being, misidentified bears, and human hoaxers. Rather than attacking or even questioning these notions or hypotheses, scientists appear to have passed judgment, apparently concluding the subject is unworthy of their attention. If and when they decide to examine the existing evidence or permit examples of it to be displayed and discussed in scientific forums, they will find that the existing notions are not so resistant at all. In the meantime, perhaps the repetition of Alan Walker's and Pat Shipman's warning is warranted. Even professionals, if they are not vigilant, are liable to fall into the trap of refusing to evaluate the evidence objectively. John Bitternagel faced such resistance for years from scientists. It's unfortunate that he passed away. There are some scientists who are open-minded, but the vast majority of them, they don't want anything to do with Sasquatch. They think it's tabloid fodder. They regard it as tabloid journalism. And some of the reasons that were pointed out by Dr. Bindernagel in this article. So, hopefully, if there is a solution to this issue at some point, scientists will come more on board with it. But until that day, I'm afraid we're going to continue to see a lot of skepticism from scientists. Finally, Loch Ness webcam watcher spots series of peculiar humps emerging from water. A persistent Loch Ness webcam watcher with a history of intriguing virtual sightings recently spotted a series of peculiar humps that emerged from the water at the iconic site. The remarkable moment, seen isolated below and on video here, occurred late last month as Eowyn O'Feilligan was keeping an eye on the live stream overlooking the location. To his amazement, a curious form suddenly broke the surface of the water, and upon closer inspection, he observed that it appeared to be four humps seemingly belonging to the same sizable creature. I tried to rationalize what I was watching, O'Feilligan recalled. And nothing else apart from this, he ticked the boxes. He went on to muse that it certainly appears that something comes up out of the water that is quite big and long, while arguing that the odd humps looked very alive, submerging at the same time as the suspected creature vanished from view. While O'Feilligan has amassed a rather astounding number of virtual sightings over the many years he has spent watching Loch Ness live streams from his home in Ireland, he singled out this particular instance as being very good by virtue of how visually clear the anomalous monster appears thanks to how near the shore it was. Nessie could not be any closer to the webcam, he marveled, unless she was out of the water. The series of humps spotted by Ella again are similar in nature to what 13-year-old Francesca McGarvey saw earlier this month while visiting the site with her family. The teenager's account, corroborated by her father, currently stands as the 2023's first and only officially recognized report by the Loch Ness Monster Sightings Register, which opted to eschew webcam cases last year unless they meet the incredibly high standard of showing a clear view of the creature's face. Fortunately, that has not dissuaded again, who continues to document oddities that he spots in the live stream. Now, are these humps? Seems like there's several humps here. If indeed it is Nessie, which we don't know for sure. Could again be seeing things? That's entirely possible. But this seems to be pretty compelling evidence, if indeed it is a Loch Ness Monster. I just hope that he'll continue to keep an eye on things as things develop. And that's going to do it for this week. I want to thank you very much for tuning in. You guys are the heart of the show. I always say that, but I always mean it. I'll continue to do this as long as you guys want me to. And hey, until next week, y'all be good or be good at it. This is HBM's Crypto Corner.